Final Stop Brasil, Chapter 27, Economy, Discrimination, Third Wedding. All the more it surprised me when he was depressed for days and hardly spoke. I asked him what was going on, but initially he wouldn't say anything. Then he explained to me what was bothering him. The Foreign Department won't renew my permit. That means what? I asked innocently. Expulsion, he said. Of course, Caroline, his foster mother, had already, with the help of a lawyer, lodged an objection against the decision. But this was only a time delay. Caroline, I knew very well by then, and jokingly called her mother-in-law. Describe me, next time we met, this designation waves currently raging through all of Germany. She knew what she was talking about, because she volunteered with an organization for the rights of foreigners and asylum seekers. Partly, there were real horror stories she knew to report. For example, people that entered the Foreign Department and were never seen again, or Africans threatened in their home countries by death penalty because they were opponents of the regime, had been placed in airplanes bound to be deported back there. Humiliation and intimidation tactics were common, unfortunately, not only there. We both knew that by opening the border and integration of ex-GDR, many East Germans, Poles and Russians moved to West Germany, and there were more workers than work. On the other hand, billions had been invested in the ailing East Germany, officially. The fact that in reality, mainly, Chancellor Kohl and his people put a lot of money into their own pockets was another matter. The reality was that the economy went down the creek in West Germany. The unemployment rate rose massively. And what do the Germans do when they're bad off? The same thing as they always did, to unleash their anger and their frustration on minorities, or in plain text against foreigners. Neo-Nazis and skinheads had a large number of followers for the battle cry, Germany for the Germans, foreigners out. More and more often we heard in the media attacks on asylum homes in East and West, encroachments, incendiary attacks, police playing stupid and blind or just for fun, mocked executions, exits against asylum seekers. The harmless harassment was to control every black on the street for identity papers. There had been cases where neo-Nazis appeared in groups and blacks alone and defenseless were cowardly beaten to death. The population looked away, just like the police. He was only an African, a bimbo, how they used to say. No one felt bothered by Russians or Polacks, the ones that perpetrated the brutal robberies or worse. These people were not persecuted and beaten to death. Their identity documents not even checked. And why? Just because they didn't appear as different. Thus, only minorities, such as Africans, were attacked. During this period, I thought for the first time seriously to leave Germany. I was afraid. Fear for my poopsie and about his future. But where should I go? Would we have it better elsewhere? Also about Geralda's problem I thought for a few days, and it reminded me of Robert. Him I had tried to help without me having a clue about the problems of Africans and asylum seekers. I was in Ghana and saw the poverty there. Children who caught rats for their parents to prepare a meal with it because nothing else was there. The children ran barefoot for kilometers because there was no money for shoes. And Ghana counted as one of the richest countries in Africa, if one may term the word rich at all in that context. In other countries such as Angola, Uganda, Congo, Ivory Coast, and, ruled war and dictatorship. I remembered the books I read about the so-called Biafra war in Nigeria. Nigeria was still not better off these days. It was divided by force, tribal enemies, different religions and cultures were forced to live side by side. But with all this misery, these people were told by the media and mouth propaganda or letters from Europe, where the people did not suffer from hunger and could buy everything they wanted, where good doctors and hospitals were, where work was for each and every one. At least this was the message to those who had nothing, or living at risk of disease, death, torture, and prison. Some fled to escape political persecution, others simply just to survive. Could anybody blame them for it? No. But in Germany this was the case, and the refugees were put in camps or overfilled homes, given like immature children pocket money in the form of lower social welfare, of which no one could really survive in Europe. But they forbade them to work. Those men and women, however, had huge families to feed in their home countries. They didn't want absolutely nothing for free. They only wanted to work, but that they weren't allowed to do. So they did it illegally, for German companies paying low wages, safe taxes and social security, to earn a fortune by asylum seekers. Of course, these workplaces were lost for the Germans. I began to inform myself how this problem was handled in our European neighbor countries, and was amazed. In the Netherlands and the UK, asylum applicants were given a work permit, and they were integrated into the social network. In the Netherlands, they were allocated next to a work permit even houses, and no one felt disturbed by Africans in the neighborhood. They simply belonged to the social life. Amir, what do you think about it if I get married to Geraldo? Geraldo? He's a witty guy, but you get married with him? I don't know. Is there a particular reason? And don't come now that this is an idea out of love, because that I'm not going to believe. I explained Amir my motives. Love is indeed playing a part, the love between Pupsi and Geraldo. Pupsi adores him, and Geraldo is more father to Pupsi than his real father ever was. Geraldo runs the risk of being deported. Amir commented almost angry. And you go to marry him just like that, to help him, yeah? May well be that he is good to your son, but I can assure you one thing. Who your son loves and needs most is you, and not some Charles or Geraldo. When you're caught in the marriage trap and you are unhappy, do you think that's good for your son? It's your decision. You need to know what you do and how you decide. I am definitely behind you. Nevertheless, I'm sure you will not be happy. Geraldo is young and not really ready to take responsibility for a family. But this he has to do if he marries you. To appease him, I hugged Amir and said, "Oh, Amir, maybe you're right. But what is safe or permanent? And responsibility? I've been having it alone and will continue to do so. Yes, and I almost would have forgotten it. For me, there are also benefits from the marriage. I pay less income tax and have more money in my pockets." Amir just rolled his eyes. "Don't forget to invite me to the wedding." I laughed. "Don't worry. I will not just invite you. I will have you as my witness." Kathy stayed distant. Neither Geraldo nor I knew if Eddie and she were still together or not. I heard from others she was going out with a Nigerian, and my hair almost stood up in horror. Then again, she was seen with Eddie, but Eddie didn't come to us, which irritated me even more. She was still going to school, though. It was yet more bad than good. I was afraid the stress with her would start all over again. If Sabine, with whom I was now good friends, came to visit, Kathy responded like a fury. But also for Sabine it was an uncommon situation. She knew that Kathy and Paolo were together before. But this was the past, and I saw no reason why she shouldn't come to see us. When I decided to invite my parents personally to our wedding, and this together with Geraldo, Kathy didn't come with us. First, we stopped by at Elke's and Rainer's place. They were very happy about our visit, and especially to see Poopsie. The fact that I presented Geraldo now didn't disturb the two of them at all. Supposedly, both had now gotten used to my somewhat extravagant life. Yes, I was different than most here in this province. Once married and then staying together for better or worse, until the end of life, with their husbands, moving into an apartment and living there forever, and retained a job until retirement. That wasn't me. I was different. While Elke told me that the piece in my parents' house was hanging totally out of balance, I counted the beer bottles Rainer finished this time, and noticed with dismay Geraldo tried to keep up with Rainer. This would not go well. After my father could not execute the hard work from before, but felt bored in the house, or my mother got on his nerves, he looked for a part-time job as a museum guide in the castle of our city. Logically, his main working day was on Sundays. But Sunday was the execution day, however, always had been for my mother, who now stubbornly not wanted to switch to another day. So there was crash and clamour every Sunday in the house of my parents. Worse, she was jealous because my father literally blossomed in this activity and studied the entire history of the castle. But this was long not all of it. There was a workaholic, and it seemed as if my father walked in his second spring. My mother, however, out of jealousy, didn't really know at what and whom she should yell first. I listened to the story amused and then blurted out, "Well, are they becoming every time dafter in an old age?" This question I asked myself secretly in regards to my sister, when she told me she was now meeting with a group of people every 2 weeks to go out to a disco. After all, Elke walked with great strides towards the age of 40. When I next looked at Geraldo, the counting of the beer bottles I had given up by now. He wasn't black anymore, but grey in his face, and just about to run to the bathroom. My parents also reacted relatively calm when I introduced Geraldo to them, and fell immediately afterwards with the door into the house by inviting them to the planned wedding. But they certainly had quite different concerns. I could see they were really busy with their crisis. My father seemed rather amused. Moreover, they were probably now used to the escapades and surprises of their youngest daughter. After a mandatory visit to the castle, with personal guide of course, we rushed back to Hamburg, where I expected once again nothing but stress. Initially, I was surprised to discover that Kathy had a nose piercing now. "Well, who likes it?" was my only comment. Then she asked me to take her with me to the sky. "Kathy, you know I can't do that, and I don't even want to," I refused. But she begged and vowed she would do everything I asked of her if she ought to come only on this night. "What's so important about this night?" I asked. "I'll show you there." I let myself be persuaded, ramming her, however, no matter how great she found it, she had to be disappeared by midnight and be in a bus direction home. Only once, why not? I said to myself. Should there be a police control, she was accompanied by a parent anyhow. I took her with me, and she hurried upstairs to the disco, while I counted the change of my cash box. Neville wasn't there this evening, and in his absence, I sometimes let one of the doormen replace me to check upstairs if everything was running smooth, and to speak a few words with the people, which of course I did even more this evening. It was still relatively early, but the sky filled up already. I caught sight of Kathy in a corner with a guy. "Mom, this is Mark," she said. This Mark turned to me, and also he greeted me politely and introduced himself in almost perfect German. I also had to admit, besides the good manners he had, he was also very handsome. I noticed right away he was a Nigerian. From that moment on, I knew there would be problems. Lots of problems. And the problems began the very same night. I left the two to return to the entrance when suddenly a kind of female sumo wrestler or boxer stood in my way. Behind this figure there were 3 other girls, not built less strong. They must have had come in after I left the cache, because I wouldn't have let them inside. Bottom drawer level. "Who's that girl there?" asked the first. "My daughter. Why do you want to know?" I asked back. "She's messing around with my boyfriend over there. Tell her she should keep away from him, or else I'm going to smack her." "Did you show your ID cards at the entrance?" They didn't, of course, and didn't even have any with them, so I dismissed them from the club. Initially, I believed to have solved the problem. At 12 midnight, Kathy and Mark left the sky, and this Mark promised to take Kathy home. I shouldn't worry. Thoughtfully, I looked after them as they left and secretly thought, this I doubt. When I left the sky at 5 in the morning, I noticed the group at the next dark corner, but because of darkness, couldn't make out what they were doing there and who it was. It appeared to me like a fist fight, nothing unusual at the Reeperbahn. But the next moment I froze with fear. These were the 4 sumos beating up Kathy. "Kathy!" I cried in horror and ran up to the group. 2 of the figures came up to me and kept threatening me with their open spring knives they held under my nose. "Keep out of this." What should I do? I had to watch helplessly as Kathy was beaten up by these bitches, giving her several punches in the face, mainly on the nose where she had a new piercing. At last, one of the police patrols, which commonly patrolled on Reeperbahn and the side streets, passed, and thus the 4 disappeared. The policeman stopped, got out the car, surveyed the situation, and called an ambulance, because Kathy was nearly unconscious. I could hardly hold her up. "Who's that girl?" asked one of the policemen. "My daughter." The policeman shook his head and asked, "What are you doing here at this hour with the girl?" I told him what had happened, and that I was in good faith, believing Kathy was at home a long time. "Do you want to report it?" "Against whom? I don't know this pack." The ambulance arrived. I followed with my car and finally received the information after Kathy was examined, broken nose, and brain trauma. Kathy was still this little girl as she lay helpless in front of me on the hospital bed, and I felt like shit because I couldn't be able to protect this little girl. Later at home, my feelings turned into rage, unbridled rage. I reported what had happened to Geraldo, coming more and more into a rage. I knew it. These shit Nigerians, nothing but trouble with them. Why is it necessary that Kathy always drops herself in trouble? Fucking shit. What comes next? I screamed, and Geraldo had his difficulties to calm me down. Of Kathy, I never learned why she was alone there at this time on the Reeperbahn, and where Mark was. Also remained a mystery to me. Just before Christmas, I received surprisingly good news. The housing association I had signed my name on the waiting list offered me an apartment and asked me in the letter to arrange a viewing immediately. The offered 3-room flat was for me very convenient traffic-wise in Hamburg-Ottensen, because it took me only 5 minutes from there to Hamburg-Bahrenfeld. No further away it was from Hamburg-Altona, the heart of Hamburg, and therefore also easily accessible by foot. The lovely multiple dwellings were built ring-shaped, with a park in the middle, and far between and behind the houses a lot of green and children playgrounds. The pure paradise for Poopsie. The apartment itself was very large and spacious, although once again it lacked 1 room. The bedroom was very large, but not suitable as a nursery, because the huge front window was very low from the floor, and since the apartment was on the 3rd floor, it appeared too dangerous to leave Poopsie inside this room. Should Poopsie fall out of the window from the children's room, which was smaller of course, he'd be landing on the balcony of the spacious living room, which offered space for a dining area and plenty of space for living and for Poopsie to play. Kitchen and bathroom were also designed very generously. The kitchen was equipped with cupboard, stove, and sink. It was not the gleaming white fitted kitchen, but I would pay for this apartment only 500 marks rental, plus 50 marks for the garage. The same day I signed the lease agreement. My relocation team was also ready for use again, and so we moved, bag and baggage, into the Holsten Ring. Even though I had to listen to some things like, "Are you going to move again this year?" With the help of a lawyer, I could immediately get out of the so-called graduated lease, because this type of contract was illegal from start to finish. Around Christmas time, the wedding of me and Geraldo almost burst. It first started with a stupid masculine perfume Geraldo brought home, trying to tell me he had bought it himself. This I didn't believe, of course. I cornered him as far to take him along with the perfume to the shop where he allegedly bought it. Disgraced him to the bone, but he didn't admit his lie. This made me so angry that on Christmas Eve I poured the entire contents of the vial into the sink, which caused even more dispute. In front of Poopsie and Kathy, I didn't show my anger, because I didn't want to spoil the Christmas Eve for them. Poopsie rejoiced over a wooden train brought by Santa Claus, and almost set it in flames by the candles of the Advent wreath. Shortly after Christmas, I couldn't help it and rummaged in Geraldo's things, which is actually quite contrary to my habit, and found a photo of Jojo, his ex-girlfriend, in his wallet. The picture wasn't all, though, because it was stitched together with an engagement ring made of gold. It was enough. I went to see Caroline, who was already busy planning our wedding in the premises of the organization opposite of the foreign department, and opened her there would be no wedding, at least not with me. The least, I suppose, is to ask for a certain confidence. So far, I believed this existed between me and Geraldo. It was a mistake, and that's why I leave it with the marriage. Caroline was furious, and immediately called Jojo on the phone to put her to task. Me, not less angry, took the phone from Caroline and said, "If you really want Geraldo so badly, then go and marry him. I give him to you as a gift. I don't have no necessary to fight for a man." "But I don't want to marry him," was her reply, almost defiantly. "You will have to if you want him at disposal here in Germany. Either all or nothing." While I spoke to Jojo, Geraldo had come through the door, which I only noticed when Caroline took him to task. Geraldo began to cry like a little boy. "I could have wring her neck. She just don't want to leave me alone." So he picked up the phone, pressed the redial button, and roared at Jojo through the mouthpiece. "Leave me alone at last, and don't destroy everything. I'm with Rita, and I will get married to her, whether you like it or not." He hung up, and I asked, "You are the poor victim, and you can't defend yourself, huh? To accept the gift she has forced you to, right? Did she put a gun to your chest?" In a half-breaking way, and with tears in his eyes, he asked me in the presence of Caroline for forgiveness. I looked for help at Caroline, who just shrugged and said, "You have to know what you do, Rita. If you pop the marriage now, it would be sad indeed, but I can understand it, and certainly I wouldn't be angry with you. You try to help him. If you do forgive him, then make him keep in mind to pull himself together, because you can separate from him at any time, and then nobody will help him any more. I won't do it either." I was totally aware of it. The only honest feeling I could expect from Geraldo was the love he had for Poopsie, but I married him anyway. Or that's why I married him in early February. It was a very nice wedding. Beside my parents, Caroline, the witnesses Amir and Sabine, the entire staff of my company surprised me at the registry office. My colleagues sprinkled rice, let lots of balloons fly, and my boss popped champagne corks. The celebration took place as planned in the rooms opposite the foreign department. which had been decorated very nicely by Caroline and her colleagues. The music was optimal, for Ralph and Bobo alternated as DJs, and all our friends had come, even my friend and fellow student Klaus, together with Silke, to whom I only had occasional telephone contact. Charles arrived with his new girlfriend, but took the opportunity, when we danced together, to whisper into my ear, "It is a pity I'm not in Geraldo's place." For a moment I did feel something like remorse, but I forgot the feeling as I watched my father completely relaxed and at ease, talking and laughing with the Africans. He clapped them friendly on their shoulders and drank with them. Incredible, my father had jumped over his own shadow. Unlike my mother, who showed indeed a good face to everything, but kept exclusively close to Klaus and Silke, or talked with Sabine and other German companions of the Africans. Kathy's reaction towards Paulo, who was of course present with Sabine, was that she came with Mark. A rich cold buffet had been ordered. Beer and soft drinks had been supplied by my company. Other alcoholic drinks and sparkling wine we had bought crates before in other shops. Poopsie was the main attraction, with his small, elegant trouser and jacket combination, white shirt and tie. He felt completely contented in the crowd. During the night it was not unnoticed my father was already well over his limit of alcohol consumption. First of all, we still thought it funny when he stammered, "Amir, if you're Rita's brother, then you're my son. If Rita comes visiting next time, then I suppose you come with her, my son." Later, I watched with concern as he wanted to toast with each and every one, whether Charles, Ralph, Eddie, or Paulo. With all of them he toasted on the wedding, and this with heavy drinks. My mother complained already, so Geraldo and I tried to convince him that it was probably enough for this night. The next thing I heard was Poopsie's frightened voice, "Mom, Grandpa is lying inside the toilet." Well, he wasn't lying inside, but in front of the toilet, and it took several strong men to raise him up on his feet again. Until the evening of the next day my father was not seen any more, but all others were thrilled with the beautiful celebration. The first score after the wedding was the foreign department. After all the stories I had heard, it was a horror for me. Geraldo took the bus at 4 o'clock in the morning, to be there on time at 4:30, and to be one of the first in the queue to draw a number for the time when authorities opened the doors at 7. He explained he could in no case be later, because it would mean to be there for hours waiting, and the likelihood would be great to be sent away empty-handed. I had to be there on time at 7, so that if we were lucky, could as quickly as possible have audition by one of the clerks. Having reached the target, the clerk considered Geraldo's file, the marriage certificate, asked Geraldo some questions about my family and details of our apartment. Sure, he intended to find out if we actually lived together. When he checked my papers, he was amazed. "You are 10 years older than your husband." "It doesn't show." Finally, he deleted the asylum application and issued a 3-month residence permit due to the marriage. "Do we have to come here every 3 months now?" I asked. The clerk explained. "No, if you come in 3 months' time, your husband will next succeed 6 months, and then added a year until the unlimited residence permit." Well, at least this was settled as for now. Then I changed my tax class, and this was with an immediate effect. My next net salary was much higher. I begrudged the luxury, of course, in installments, to buy a new living room set and a large 6-corner dining room table with 5 chairs. I couldn't afford many big things, because I had a long time to pay monthly installments for my great mistake of real estate. There was another point for me to clear. In no case I wished to use a different surname as Poopsie. With the wedding I attended Geraldo's name, and Poopsie should also have this name. This was done quite simply. With Geraldo's agreement, Poopsie received Within a few days, a new birth certificate with the name of Geraldo. Initially, the change came slowly, and without me really noticing it myself, with my new life as a happy wife. For if Poopsie was happy, I was happy too, and he really was. Whenever I watched how Geraldo was treating Poopsie, it touched me. I also gave Poopsie all the love in this world, and still we made trips every weekend with him. Went with him into the Black Mountains, where deer stacks, wild boar, and many species of birds could be seen. There was also a petting zoo with young goats, rabbits, guinea pigs, and Poopsie petted everything, coming under his small hands. But to weigh himself in security, he always held his one hand tight to the one of Geraldo. Geraldo took him along on an elephant ride at the zoo, while I shot photos which Poopsie could later show his own children. Often we went with Paolo and Sabine to any lakes in the area and made a picnic or a barbecue. My enthusiasm to work in Sky waned, and I also finally unlatched from the Sunday breakfast. I much preferred to have breakfast with Poopsie and Geraldo. It was fun to watch movies or other programs on the TV together with Geraldo, and nibble bags of chips or sweets. For hours we could talk about the TV program or about other topics. I even found my old passion again, cooking. Often I prepared some delicious menus Geraldo liked very much, and what Geraldo liked, Poopsie ate also with great appetite. I began to bake cakes, and brought the most delicious things on the coffee table, that even Kathy was attracted to join us. Otherwise, she withdrew herself mostly, hardly spoke, except she dealt with Poopsie, what suspiciously, the family life, but no more. Any conversations she blocked, and whether she was with Mark, we couldn't really get out of her. I was, however, during this period completely satisfied. Our sex life was indeed not satisfactory for me, but so what? I didn't complain, because for me the happiness of Poopsie was more important than anything else in the world. Finally, I had a conversation with Neville, and explained to him that it was simply getting too much for me to work during the day, 5 days a week, and additionally during the weekends at night. Neville was far from happy about it. I had worked for him for 5 years now, and he knew he could trust me 100%. We had experienced a lot, fought and laughed together. We were almost like an old married couple, and it certainly wasn't easy for me to take this decision, but Neville understood, but asked me to stay until he found a substitute, and made me promise to be there if any distress would be the case. Of course I would. This way, it would at least be a slow departure from the club which had become part of my life. I loved the Saturday evenings, when I could put my feet up after an afternoon on the playground, or if we spent a cozy evening with Sabina and Paolo, usually the 5 of us, because Poopsie was always with us. This change of life also changed the size of my dresses, initially from 36 to 38, and yet I wasn't thinking too much about it. It didn't take too long, and those Saturdays, when I was now at home, that Geraldo began to go out more frequently. I left him, because with his 23 years, I couldn't expect him to sit at home all the time. But then he stayed away all night. There were strange phone calls, quickly hung up again when I attended them. If Geraldo answered, he put the conversation to our secondary telephone in the bedroom. I still said nothing, for Poopsie's sake. I wanted to avoid controversy. For weeks it was like this, and I closed my eyes to all this. In the presence of Poopsie, everything was as before, but if we were alone, we suddenly had nothing more to say to each other. I felt lonely, because I had gotten used to watching TV, cuddling onto Geraldo, or the exchange of affection, even if it brought me nothing with him in bed. It was the touching, hugging I missed. On one Saturday evening, once again, I sat in the Sky entrance. Marco stood suddenly before me, saying, I finally made it and found you here. He waited for me until I had finished my work. Then he gave me the address of a hotel and instructions how to get there. As we entered the room, I was quite amazed to find suitcases and clothes of Marco here, among other personal things. This was not the kind of hotel we used to rent a room for several hours. It was an expensive hotel. We sat on the comfortable armchairs, and Marco began to explain that he was divorced and had left Hamburg. He had only returned for 2 weeks to visit his daughter and to see me. Marco showed me photos of a fashion show with men on the catwalk. One of them was him. Another photo showed him alone on the catwalk. He made a very elegant and attractive appearance. "This is my job, but not only this," he told me enthusiastically, and showed me more pictures. Movie scenes with the well-known German director and actor Udo Kier, who discovered him. He told me all about it and showed me an American magazine with more information about the production of the film in which he participated, and yet more photos of Marco. I was honestly surprised, and smiled at him admiringly. "You live in the States now?" "Yes, in Los Angeles," he replied, not without pride. Then asked seriously, "And you? How are you?" "You are married now, I've heard," looking at the ring on my finger. The next moment I found myself in his arms, and we kissed, long and deeply. He pulled me from the chair and pushed me tenderly over to the big bed. Marco gave me all the love I missed for so long without wanting to admit it. We made love several times that morning. Time had become irrelevant. Why me, Marco? Because I love you. I want you to come with me, Rita. I couldn't stop thinking of you and hoped so much to find you there in the sky. You've changed the phone number, and when I stood in front of your apartment, I found out that you have moved. I didn't know where else except in the sky I could find you. Rita, take your children and come with me." I clung to his chest and enjoyed his gentle touch. When I looked at the clock, I was startled. It was already 10 o'clock in the morning. But I would tell Geraldo I was having breakfast with the gang. It gave me a little time more. "Are you hungry? Shall I order breakfast for us?" he asked between his kisses. I told him no. After we had made love once again, I dressed quickly to go back home as fast as possible. I had to think and be alone, and this I explained to him. "Marco, please give me some time. I can't simply decide it like this." I gave him my phone number and promised to see him the next day. When I entered the apartment and heard the merry voices of Poopsie and Geraldo in the kitchen, I was overcome with a terrible guilty conscience. I entered the kitchen and tried to appear as naturally as possible when I gave Poopsie a kiss. "Oh, you're cooking. That's good, because I'm pretty much tired, you know," I said. "Where were you for so long?" Geraldo wanted to know. I replied without looking at him, while I poured me coffee into a cup. "We all went for breakfast again. Oh, by the way, are you at home tomorrow night? I promised Alex to visit her." Geraldo gave me a strange look. I took my coffee, lit a cigarette, and listened to what Poopsie had to tell me. He was looking forward to going for a walk after lunch with Geraldo, and eating ice cream too. "That's fine, then I can sleep a little," I said. Stood up and checked whether Kathy was still asleep. She could really spend the whole day in bed. Then I let water run for my bath with loads of bubbles and relaxed in the hot water. I thought of Marco and could feel how much I missed him already now. Why we had only just lost sight of each other, or better, why didn't I simply not have seen him anymore? I asked myself this moment what I really felt for him. Was it love? Admiration for the career he had now taken? No, such things were, with all due respect, secondary for me. Security and safety, these feelings he gave me. Marco was intelligent, a good interlocutor, and he knew exactly what he wanted. Above all, he was honest. Marco had never lied to me concerning his marriage. I closed my eyes and saw him before me, this fantastically good-looking man with his toned body, and I would have loved to go back to him immediately. I finally got tired from the bath, dried myself, put on panties and t-shirt. Since I lived with Geraldo, I was never accustomed to something other than wearing t-shirts for sleeping. Sleepy, I lied down on my side of the double bed. Our bedroom furniture was the wedding gift from Caroline. The door opened and Geraldo came in, closing the door behind him. "I've been talking to Amir on the phone. For breakfast was none of you today. So where were you?" Shit, fully caught. But now I wanted everything but no trouble. I was simply tired. "Geraldo, let me sleep, please. Let's talk later, okay?" Geraldo left the bedroom without saying another word. Late in the afternoon, I woke up, listened, but no one seemed to be at home. I stood up, and then it occurred to me again what had happened. I found everyone had flown out. I made coffee and thought of what I would tell Geraldo. Somehow, I was certainly angry. Damn! Geraldo did what he wanted, and came and went as and however he pleased, but was trying to set rules on me. I had an idea of for the sake of peace. The phone rang, and I automatically looked at the clock. It was 5:30 in the afternoon. Shit, at this time, my mother had this new habit of calling me always in order to talk about things I was absolutely not interested in at all. But if I wouldn't answer the phone now, she would try again and again until she collided with my favorite show on television. So I preferred now. It was she. The last person I wanted to talk to now, and so I made the conversation short. After I hung up the phone, I automatically picked it up. "Hello?" I basically never attended with my name. "Hi, baby. How are you? I wanted to tell you that I love you and miss you. Can you talk, or do I call unfavorable?" I was flooded with a warm, comforting feeling when I heard Marco's voice. Smiling, I replied, "I can talk, and miss you too." For a while we spoke. He told me he had visited his daughter this Sunday and just returned when I heard the front door opening and Poopsie entering with Geraldo. "I'll have to finish until tomorrow," I breathed quickly into the phone as Poopsie called, "Mama!" storming in and happily climbing up on the couch to cuddle me. Geraldo sat himself initially silent with us. Before Poopsie's bedtime, I prepared him his favorite bread with Nutella, bathed him, brushed his little teeth, put on diapers and pajamas, and let him say good night to Geraldo to put him to sleep. During all this time, I wondered how Poopsie would react if Marco would take Geraldo's place. No, never. I could not take Poopsie's dad away from him, and the best was, I forgot the whole story with Marco and wouldn't go to see him tomorrow. "Geraldo, I did have breakfast, but not with a clique. I met Marco in Sky. He invited me, and we just only talked a long time," I lied. "Marco!" I saw that all of Geraldo's alarm bells rang. Geraldo was well aware that Marco could be dangerous to our marriage, or better, his residence permit. He laughed cynically. "So you both were having breakfast for almost 6 hours? That you don't even believe yourself, do you? I can well imagine what you've been doing. The same thing you did behind Charles' back. It was enough. You want to accuse me of anything? Where are you if you stay away night after night? Am I making such a fuss as you are doing now? No, I don't even ask you where you've been. But in order to give you accurate information, Marco no longer lives in Hamburg. He's only visiting here, and therefore we indeed had very much to talk about. Believe it or not, I don't care, and that's all on the issue." In my mind, the issue, however, was long not finished yet. "Baby," Marco was after Tony the only one who called me like this. Didn't I want to go away from Germany anyway at some point? But going to the United States? And what if it would not work out all right? Or Poopsie didn't like Marco. This was the problem. Poopsie didn't know Marco, and 2 weeks wouldn't be enough for the two to get to know each other. It was simply impossible. End of the story. Geraldo, I'll be leaving now. I told you I was going to Glynde to see Alex. I saw by Geraldo's look at me that he didn't believe a word. In the hotel, I stepped out of the elevator and knocked on the door, which opened immediately, as if Marco had stood behind it. We immediately fell into each other's arms and kissed each other tenderly. Marco looked deeply into my eyes and caressed my hair. Baby, I love you. He pushed me gently on the bed. While we were making love, he looked me in the eye and asked me, Baby, do you love me? For a moment I looked at him and then replied, Yes, Marco, I love you. At this moment, I meant what I said. We were lying for a while, curled up, arm in arm. Why didn't you give me a chance then? You simply told me on the phone it's over, he asked. I couldn't explain it. I didn't know it myself. One thing I really did know was I loved Marco. It wasn't just the sex with him. My feelings for him were much deeper. Marco got up and rummaged through his things, came back with a little heart-shaped gift box, made of shells, and gave it to me. Open it, he invited me. I lifted the lid and saw inside the box, on the red satin inlet, a chain, white gold with a little pendant of white and yellow gold, and a diamond in the middle. Marco exclaimed. He took the chain and put it on me. On Tuesday, I had a serious problem to concentrate on my work. Where are you with your mind? Asked Andrea. How should I explain to her that I was in love, but not with my husband? After so many years, after Tony, I had not even believed myself I ever could love a man again. This time, I didn't even talk to Amir about it. I was ashamed to admit how right he had been, then with his warnings. The following nights, I went to see Marco without even saying a word to Geraldo. Geraldo said nothing either, and he didn't hold me back. A few days before his return to the States, he phoned me as he did every day, but this day I wasn't home, because I had simply forgotten the time sitting with Kirsten taking coffee. When I came home with Poopsie, Geraldo was just about to pack his things into a suitcase. What is this, Geraldo? You can see it. I won't let you fool around with me any longer. I'm leaving. Then you can bring your Marco here. Poopsie began to cry. He didn't understand what happened, but he felt that something was very wrong. Have you gone crazy? How do you get such a rubbish idea? Geraldo picked up Poopsie on his arm to calm him and replied, Your Marco has called. I asked him whether you two are together, and what do you think he answered? In fact, he confirmed you are, and also will remain together. I was angry. Marco had promised to hang up if Geraldo should attend the phone, because he didn't have any right to anticipate me this way. Geraldo set Poopsie back down again with the words, I'm sorry, Poopsie. Papa must go away. Poopsie knew instinctively Geraldo didn't mean he had to go somewhere quick and come back soon. So he wept aloud. Dad, don't go away. It almost broke my heart, and I was full of bad conscience. Geraldo, wait. Let's talk, please. I confessed everything to Geraldo about what had happened, and added, Honestly, I don't know what to do. Whereupon Geraldo answered, You have to decide. He or I, now and here. My eyes fell on Poopsie, clung to Geraldo. Looking with tears in his eyes from one to the other, I was at a loss. I felt love for Marco, that was certain. But wasn't it just selfish of me? Geraldo, I can't decide here and now. Give me a little time, and stay here, please, for Poopsie's sake. I grabbed my bag and car keys and turned again at the door. I'll be back soon. Marco, why did you do this? Marco knew exactly what I was talking about. I love you, and you loved me too. I think it's enough now with this game of hiding. Why are you not committing yourself to us? Why don't you tell your husband the truth? Marco was now just as angry as I was. This I've already done after you have prepared him thoroughly. Then everything is clear. You will come to the States? Marco, this is not as simple as that. I can't easily decide in a few days. I have to think of my son. And what if it doesn't work between the two of us? What will happen to me and my children then in the States? In a few days, you say. How long is this game already going on between us? The only difference is before it was Charles. Now it is your husband. And you say you love me? Do you know what I think? I'm just a pastime for you. You never really have been serious about me. While he spoke, he pulled around, brushed his teeth, and when I asked him what he was doing, he answered, I will go out. I have sat long enough in this room just waiting for you. Marco, please. No, please. Decide here and now. I said nothing. For Marco, it was answer enough. Please go. I just hope you won't regret it one day. Good luck, baby. With these words, he literally pushed me out of the door. I knew he was very hurt. At home, Geraldo was waiting for me in the living room, and... Nothing, Aunt. It's over. This time, it was me who packed the suitcase for me and Pupsi. What are you doing? Asked Geraldo. Can't you see it? Coincidentally, I have leave and want a few days out of here. Alone? No, with Pupsi. And where? I don't know. We'll simply drive off, and let's see where we land in. Geraldo shook his head. What about me? What about you? How long have you finished your school already? And now you're just lying idle in bed with your ass, while I go to work every day. Use the time and get yourself a job at last. For me, the conversation had ended. I loaded 2 suitcases in the car, biscuits and drinks for the trip, and asked Pupsi to say goodbye to Geraldo. Pupsi was quite excited about the next adventure. When will he come back? Geraldo asked. I answered, shrugging my shoulders. No idea. In a week, the latest in 2. Actually, I did not know where we would be going. The main thing first, away from it all. I still suffered greatly under the separation from Marco, and especially under the knowledge I indeed had made a big mistake. I missed Marco terribly, but tried to convince myself I did it for Pupsi, who was happy his dad stayed and had not gone away. Out of frustration and grief, I ate too much chocolate, cake, ice cream, and all the things I liked. If I cooked spaghetti, our favorite dish, I ate 2 or 3 plates full, and then lay down lazily on the couch. The result was, after a short time, the size of 42. The entire wardrobe didn't fit me anymore, but I kept telling myself that I will get down again, and left all the clothes in the closet. I was only feeling well in my sloppy leggings and white masculine shirts. Daily arguments with Geraldo were on the agenda, because he didn't even think in his dreams to look for a job, and lived wonderfully at my expense. I had enough for a long time. The only reason why I had not thrown him out was Pupsi, for Geraldo was still always a loving father. First off, I went in the direction of Kiel. Then the highway sign showed to Flensburg. Instead of leaving the highway in Kiel, I hit the accelerator and went towards Flensburg. On Friday evenings, Pupsi and I regularly watched a television series, The Country Doctor. Pupsi understood, of course, nothing of the plot, but he found it interesting because it interested me. In addition to the action, I liked the beautiful, typically North German landscape and the huge country house where the series was filmed, near Friedrichstadt. I left the highway near Flensburg and drove towards the city of Friedrichstadt. Why not try something new? On the long run, the beach at Weissenhaus was boring. I asked my way through until we reached the village, and stood in front of this impressive, famous country house. Pupsi was amazed that he could now see in real what was otherwise seen only on television. The village offered much more, though. A cute castle we visited hand in hand. In front of it was an idyllic lake. We took a walk around to have our lunch afterwards, on the sunny terrace of a local excursion restaurant. Then we made our way to Friedrichstadt city, the German Venice, where many rivers cross the city and the boats and small vessels are not only tourist attraction, but also the main public transport. First off, I headed to a hotel to book a room for us. It was already late and Poopsie was tired from the long walks. After I put him to bed, he was soon asleep. I felt much better than I had for a long time. Free like birds. Only Poopsie and me. The sky is the limit. The next day we hired a small motorboat and passed through the canals, admiring the beautiful scenery and the pretty colored cottages, which lay directly at the riverbanks. For Poopsie it was all terribly exciting, and he beamed his handsome smile when I photographed him on the boat. I wondered what we could do next, and had an idea. We sped with the car to Flensburg, where I looked up the telephone number of Klaus and Silke, who now lived here. I dialed and was lucky. Silke was totally thrilled and described how to get to their house. Silke had a newborn baby with Klaus, and the four of them, including the son of her former relationship, lived in a beautiful country house. There was plenty of space, and so we stayed for several days. We definitely had a lot to talk. Klaus and Silke were tactful enough to avoid asking whether things were okay between me and Geraldo. Of course, they had noticed that I had gained plenty of weight. The weather was great, a really nice summer. We were able to spend much time with the children on the beach. There I spotted poster advertising for the Legoland in Denmark. Klaus, how far is it from here to the Legoland? I asked in the evening. 1.5 to 2 hours, he gave me information. The journey is worthwhile, especially for the children. It is wonderful, but also wonderfully expensive. Why don't we all go together when you're off? I suggested. Klaus and Silke were not enthusiastic. They already had been and didn't want to spend a fortune again. So we went on our own to Denmark. I just hoped there would be no problem at the border, like the time when Dirk and I tried to go there with Kathy, and I had been rejected because I had no identity papers for Kathy with me. This time was no problem, and we were allowed entry to Denmark. After 45 minutes we arrived at our destination, and when Poopsie saw all the giant figures and animals, everything built from Lego bricks, which he knew only in miniature as a toy, he forgot everything and looked at me with gigantic eyes. I noticed the mess only when it was too late. Poopsie had, in his excitement, wet his pants. I had thought of everything, but not of diapers and clothes for change. Normally Poopsie was already clean. I didn't need diapers anymore. But in great excitement, such accidents just happened. I bent down to him and took him in my arms. Luckily it was hot and the shorts dried quickly. What else was there to do, because I found not even a toilet in this part of the park. Quickly Poopsie was distracted as we boarded a large pirate ship, and he mingled with the other children who were playing pirate. Close by was a snack bar, and we had original Danish hot dogs with fries for lunch, but I was almost full up alone by the salty prices, but Poopsie loved it. Afterwards we walked through the Lego miniature world, where all possible states and cities were typically reconstructed from the original Lego bricks. Many things were moving like in real life, such as aircrafts rolling across runways, the windmills turning their arms, the trains moving across railroads, boats glided over real water, the warning signs and lights switched off and on. Poopsie was fascinated and knew not even where he should look first. We reached the rides for the kids also, made of Lego blocks, and Poopsie could not get enough of the carousels, cars and boats, where he rode over an artificial lake, with crocodiles, of course made of Lego bricks, suddenly emerging from the water. The two of us had all the time in the world, but eventually the park would indeed close its doors. So I found myself sadly forced to drag Poopsie on with loud outcries. In the western city, Poopsie then was reconciled again and watched very concentrated the western show with real horses and Indians. In a typical western saloon, we had dinner, and Poopsie devoured it with great appetite, a child's menu, while I gave myself a barbecue skewer. After only 5 minutes in the car, Poopsie had already fallen into a deep sleep on our way back. I was happy, because Poopsie's bright eyes and his smile was for me the highest happiness on earth. Quietly I said, "That was just the beginning. I'll show you the whole world, Poopsie." We stayed a few more days in Flensburg, undertook a cruise on a ship to Denmark, and back again. Poopsie also found quite exciting. While I sat outside with Poopsie on the deck, an about 8-year-old boy, who had already watched us for some time, approached us. Poopsie was also curious now, and looked at the boy expectantly. When the boy heard I spoke German with Poopsie, he asked, "Is that your son?" I nodded. "Why is your son a Negro?" I patiently explained to the boy that Negro was a word he better should not use, and Poopsie was dark-skinned because his dad is African. "I've never seen a Negro." Still, I patiently explained to him again that Negro was not a nice word. Poopsie laughed at the boy encouragingly. He wanted to play with him, but the boy didn't quite know how he should behave. Finally, he left the deck and went inside the vessel. After a short time, he returned and remarked, "My father said he is a Negro." How should children learn when the ancients are ignorant? We made another trip to Schleswig, visiting the famous castle, and afterwards rode to Eckernförde, this pretty port town. Finally, we were on our way back to Hamburg. I was tanned and relaxed from the sun. Poopsie, however, was almost as black as Geraldo, who received us happily. The house sparkled with cleanliness, and in order for me, he immediately put on coffee as he listened to everything Poopsie had experienced. Kathy came home from who knows where, and ripped her brother happily in her arms. And that was the end of order, because the two started a pillow fight with my couch cushions. Cross over my furniture. "Welcome home," laughed Geraldo. He even had good news. He had been hired at McDonald's. Kathy shouted, enthusiastic, "Then you can bring us hamburgers every day, right?" Everything resumed its normal course. Poopsie had turned 3 years old, and we celebrated this birthday with Kirsten and her family, and with Sabina and Paolo, much to the displeasure of Kathy. As before, I tried to lead talks with Kathy to approach her, but without success. I knew nothing of her moving around or who she was friends with. She never brought a girlfriend home or a friend. Now and then she talked of a Vivian, and many times I asked her to bring her friend home, but she didn't. In our house lived 2 other boys, Poopsie's age. They were already playing alone outside in the garden. As Poopsie took notice of this, he also wanted to play coarse. My neighbor encouraged me. "Let him play with the others. Nothing will happen to him. And he can't run away. There are always bigger children or parents watching." And so went my Poopsie his first own way, and found his first friends, with whom he grew up together and developed a steady friendship. I was a little sad, because now my gold baby was leaving his nest.